The genesis of modern science fiction cinema is often remembered as a series of calculated corporate masterstrokes, but the reality behind the 1994 cinematic gamble known as Stargate resembles a chaotic game of high-stakes roulette played in a dimly lit room. Long before the property transformed into a sprawling syndication empire with conventions, fan theories, and multiple television spin-offs, it existed only as an ambitious script, a massive physical ring, and a production that threatened to disintegrate on an almost daily basis. The primary architect of this madness, director Roland Emmerich, was attempting to mount a massive epic designed to prove that ancient astronaut theories were not merely the stuff of late-night supermarket paperbacks, but a viable foundation for a new cinematic mythology. Hollywood executives, however, were notoriously blind to the vision, viewing the blend of ancient Egyptian aesthetics and deep space wormhole physics as an expensive, unmarketable risk that lacked a built-in franchise safety net. Turned down by every major American studio, Emmerich and co-writer Dean Devlin were forced to look toward European financing, securing their visual ambitions through precarious independent backing that offered absolutely no financial safety margin for error. The physical heart of the entire narrative enterprise was the titular gateway itself, a monumental prop whose construction would ultimately decide the fate of the $55 million budget before a single line of dialogue was even recorded on set. When the massive 22-foot circular door was first rolled out onto the soundstage inside the historic Spruce Goose Dome in Long Beach, the immediate collective reaction from the creative team was not awe, but absolute bone-chilling panic. Painted in a flat, matte black finish meant to suggest an ancient and mysterious cosmic material, the giant ring completely swallowed every ounce of expensive studio light thrown its way, looking entirely inert and frustratingly lifeless under the lenses. The intricate alien glyphs and historic carvings that were supposed to radiate an aura of omnipotent extraterrestrial power instead appeared shallow, dull, and remarkably cheap, resembling a giant discarded truck tire rather than a doorway to another galaxy. Devlin would later confess that the entire crew realized the brutal truth simultaneously. If this central physical object failed to convince the audience, the entire narrative illusion would instantly shatter, rendering every actor's performance and every pyrotechnic explosion utterly meaningless. Faced with a disaster that could tank the independent production before the cameras even started rolling properly, the filmmakers enacted a desperate late-night gamble that flew directly in the face of traditional scenic design practices. Working under crushing time constraints between scheduled shooting days, an exhausted crew completely coated the entire 22-foot structure in a vibrant, highly reflective metallic silver paint, a frantic adjustment born entirely out of raw desperation and professional fear. This sudden aesthetic pivot radically altered how the physical object interacted with the surrounding environment, as the new metallic silver surface began to beautifully bend, reflect, and manipulate the intense studio illumination in ways the flat black paint never could. When the massive studio floodlights and flickering fire torches hit the newly painted structure, the ancient glyphs suddenly appeared to ignite along their physical edges, creating an illusion of deep, layered texture and latent cosmic energy. This mechanical modification instantly transformed the prop from a heavy, cumbersome piece of painted plaster into a dominant, visually commanding entity that anchored the frame and gave the entire production a grounded sense of material honesty. While the physical gateway was rescued by paint and sheer panic, the psychological framework of the film was simultaneously fracturing under the weight of two profoundly skeptical lead actors who did not initially trust the material. James Spader, an actor who had carefully cultivated a reputation for portraying deeply eccentric, highly articulate characters in grounded independent dramas, was famously bewildered and repelled by the early drafts of the script that reached his desk. To Spader, the narrative felt tonally fractured and structurally unstable, balancing awkwardly between a pedantic academic lecture on historical linguistics and a loud, bombastic Hollywood action spectacle filled with derivative explosions. He openly worried that participating in such a bizarre, unproven concept might leave an indelible, embarrassing stain on his artistic career. Yet he found himself strangely drawn to the script's glaring narrative imperfections and lack of safe, corporate calculation. The character of Daniel Jackson, an academically exiled linguist who was socially isolated and fundamentally misunderstood, offered Spader a unique vulnerability that he realized he could weaponize to subvert the traditional, hyper-masculine tropes of 90s science fiction cinema. At the exact opposite end of the character spectrum stood Hollywood veteran Kurt Russell, whose initial hesitation to join the project stemmed from a deep dissatisfaction with how his character, Colonel Jack O'Neill, was originally constructed on the page. In the initial drafts, O'Neill was written as a flat, two-dimensional military caricature who possessed little more than a high-caliber weapon, a rigid sense of duty, and a completely predictable trajectory through the alien terrain. Russell saw absolutely no psychological depth or emotional resonance in this generic soldier archetype, and flatly declined the role, forcing Devlin and Emmerich to aggressively revise the script to inject a devastating internal conflict. The writers gave O'Neill a crushing, unyielding armor of grief, making him a grieving father who had recently lost his young son to a tragic household shooting incident, a man essentially on a silent, suicidal mission into the stars. This profound emotional anchor completely recontextualized the character for Russell, who realized that the soldier's cold exterior was not just military discipline, but a profound psychological defense mechanism that would give the broader cosmic adventure a necessary weight. With Russell finally secured for a staggering $7 million salary, his high-profile involvement provided the critical financial leverage needed to reassure anxious foreign investors, effectively anchoring international pre-sales for a movie Hollywood had rejected. However, the deep-seated creative anxieties surrounding the screenplay did not magically dissipate once the cameras started rolling in the sweltering heat, but instead escalated into full-blown executive standoffs on the active soundstages. James Spader's intense perfectionism and ongoing concerns about the dialogue reached a dramatic boiling point when the actor reportedly barricaded himself inside his production trailer, flatly refusing to set foot on the set until specific lines were rewritten. Spader was deeply terrified of his character being reduced to a mere vehicle for clumsy exposition, arguing that the written dialogue was fundamentally unnatural and threatened to completely destroy the intellectual credibility of his performance. This sudden creative strike completely froze the shooting schedule, causing immense anxiety as valuable production time ticked away, translating directly into thousands of dollars of irreplaceable independent capital bleeding out with every passing hour of silence. The escalating tension inside the production trailer village was ultimately broken not by a diplomatic producer or a gentle director, but by a blunt, no-nonsense intervention from Kurt Russell himself, who confronted his younger co-star directly. When Spader intensely argued that the script's dialogue was fundamentally terrible and painful to deliver, Russell reportedly looked at him and delivered an iconic, brutally pragmatic reality check about the filmmaking industry. Russell explained that of course the dialogue was terrible, emphasizing that the sheer imperfection of the material was precisely the reason the studio was paying them such an astronomical sum of money to elevate it. He bluntly told Spader that if the script were already flawless and required no creative heavy lifting from its actors, the studio would have found someone to perform it for free. This sharp, capitalistic perspective was not intended as a personal insult, but rather as an essential professional reminder that commercial filmmaking is a chaotic marriage of pure commerce and compromise, demanding execution over artistic preciousness. This confrontational realization effectively broke the creative deadlock, prompting Emmerich and Devlin to rapidly adapt by rewriting script pages directly on the set, often adjusting dialogue just hours before the cameras rolled. They carefully sharpened the text to better match Spader's natural, hesitant cadence, replacing stiff, academic blocks of exposition with sharp sarcasm, subtle human behavioral reactions, and moments of genuine comedic bewilderment. These fast, high-pressure adjustments radically transformed Daniel Jackson from a walking encyclopedia into a deeply relatable human being who was visibly terrified yet utterly fascinated by the impossible alien world unfolding around him. Meanwhile, the production team was simultaneously forcing miracles in the desert locations, shooting the film's monumental 1928 Egyptian excavation prologue under an incredibly tight schedule that allowed for only a few days of actual filming. To stretch their limited financial resources into something that looked grand and cinematic, the crew constructed only partial physical sets, cleverly using simple, cloth-draped wooden figures placed strategically in wide shots to simulate thousands of distant, ancient laborers. The intense, palpable strain that saturated every layer of the production did not ultimately weaken the final cinematic product, but instead seemed to forcefully refine its artistic vision through a process of creative trial by fire. The constant behind-the-scenes arguments forced absolute narrative clarity, while the severe budgetary limitations demanded an ingenious level of precision from the visual effects department, which was quietly preparing for its own monumental battles. While the famous actors wrestled with their dialogue in the trailers, Visual effects supervisor Jeffrey Okun was embarking on a thoroughly unglamorous, low-tech journey to create the Gateway's iconic liquid portal. Okun faced continuous harsh rejection from Roland Emmerich, who repeatedly dismissed standard digital concepts because he envisioned a gateway effect that felt intensely mechanical, violent, and physically unnatural rather than smooth. Seeking a breakthrough away from the restrictive digital tools of the era, Okun and cinematographer David Stump retreated to a household garage, setting up a crude plexiglass tank filled with water and ordinary iced tea powder to give the liquid a dense, trackable visual consistency. This highly unconventional garage experiment involved attaching a simple wooden beam to a standard household power drill, which was then immersed in the murky liquid to create a violent, swirling vortex within the glass walls. When the chaotic turbulence finally settled, the filmmakers noticed a distinct, captivating spiral pattern that would ultimately become the signature physical texture of the Stargate's open wormhole. To generate the terrifying, explosive outward surge that occurs when the portal is first activated, the team began firing blasts of high-pressure compressed air directly into the dense, tea-filled water tank. Early experimental attempts used far too much atmospheric pressure, resulting in violent accidental explosions that blasted dirty water entirely across the garage, completely drenching expensive camera equipment and startled crew members. Eventually, they meticulously fine-tuned the physical force to achieve a beautifully controlled cinematic eruption that looked like an inverted cosmic waterfall bursting forth into reality. This practical footage was captured using specialized high-speed cameras running at roughly 120 frames per second, providing the raw, organic visual foundation that would define the film's most iconic sequence. The arduous process of rendering the completed wormhole travel sequence required an immense, month-long commitment of continuous computer processing time, a massive technological undertaking during the mid-1990s when digital rendering power was agonizingly slow. There were absolutely no options for instant digital playback or real-time adjustments, meaning the effects team often had to wait days just to see if a specific digital element properly aligned with the live-action footage. This was the twilight of the classic photochemical era, requiring a complex, delicate blending of physical film layers using traditional optical printers alongside primitive, newly emerging digital compositing software. Late in the post-production phase, long after the primary photography had wrapped, the editorial team made a sudden, terrifying decision that the movie desperately required 66 additional complex visual effects shots to maintain its narrative packing. This massive creative demand was not made during pre-production planning, but during the absolute final week before the hard studio delivery deadline, pushing the exhausted effects team into an impossible round-the-clock marathon. Using an early, highly volatile real-time digital compositing system known as Domino, the visual effects artists worked under brutal, sleep-deprived conditions to assemble massive shots involving the alien pyramid ship, sweeping desert skylines, and complex practical explosions. Simultaneously, another team was wrestling with the film's groundbreaking morphing sequences, specifically the moments where the intricate animal-headed armor of the alien guards mechanically folded away to reveal human faces underneath. These pioneering morphing effects took nearly 9 full months of dedicated technical development to perfect, largely because off-the-shelf software of the era routinely failed when handling such intricate physical geometry. Early digital tests were laughably horrifying, resulting in character ears drifting aimlessly across the screen, digital textures collapsing into black holes, and human faces warping into grotesque, melting piles of pixels. To solve this digital nightmare, the programming team was forced to write entirely custom software tools designed to simulate what Emmerich described as negative space, allowing the metal plates to fold into impossible dimensions. These highly complex, ancient digital transformations remain slightly imperfect when viewed under the ultra-high-definition lenses of the modern era. Yet that specific mechanical imperfection is precisely what makes the effect so uniquely unsettling and memorable. The physical complexity and immense financial cost of these morphing shots were so staggering. When the franchise eventually transitioned into a weekly television series, the showrunners rarely ever depicted the helmets folding away. The original feature film had achieved a level of practical and digital spectacle that the television spin-off simply could not afford to replicate on a weekly basis, forcing the writers to imply the technology rather than show it. While the visual effects artists were battling the limitations of early computer processing in air-conditioned darkrooms, the practical production crew in the desert was discovering that nature had its own brutal plans to disrupt the movie. The alien world of Abydos was filmed on location around the scorching dunes of Yuma, Arizona, an unforgiving environment where daily temperatures routinely soared past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The extreme desert heat created a surreal, hostile workplace where ordinary plastic water bottles would completely melt into deformed shapes if left exposed to the direct sunlight for more than a few minutes. The delicate mechanisms inside the expensive Panavision film cameras frequently jammed as the internal lubricants literally baked under the sun, forcing the crew to wrap the camera bodies in cold, damp towels to keep them operational. Furthermore, the sweeping, pristine desert vistas required for wide cinematic shots were constantly ruined by the stray footprints of crew members, requiring a dedicated team to meticulously erase the sand textures with brooms before every single take. For the background actors stuffed inside the massive, heavy Horus and Anubis guard costumes, the desert shoot was a literal exercise in physical survival, as the elaborate fiberglass helmets featured absolutely no internal ventilation. The glowing, menacing eyes of the alien helmets were powered by small, heavy battery packs taped directly inside the headpieces, creating an intense internal heat trap that caused several performers to collapse from profound exhaustion. The production's ambition frequently collided with the unyielding realities of practical animal wrangling, most notably during the attempts to realize the Mastedge, a fictional alien pack beast designed to look like a prehistoric mammal. The creature was originally conceived as a massive, full-scale practical suit designed to be placed entirely over a live, trained theatrical horse, but the resulting costume proved to be completely unmanageable. Once strapped inside the heavy, suffocating fiberglass and fur apparatus, the highly stressed horse found itself completely unable to move its legs naturally, presenting a serious safety hazard that threatened to shut down the desert chute entirely. The ultimate solution was both humiliatingly low-tech and brilliant. The crew abandoned the full-scale horse suit for wide shots, instead relying on clever miniatures and a small, energetic dog pulling a scaled-down prop cart. When framed precisely through a wide-angle lens and shot from a deliberately low perspective, the disguised canine managed to convey a convincing sense of immense physical scale and lumbering weight to the unsuspecting audience. Adding another layer of profound unpredictability to the volatile production mix was the casting of the film's main antagonist, Ra, played by the enigmatic and fiercely anti-Hollywood figure Jay Davidson. Discovered entirely by chance on the streets of London and thrust into sudden global fame following an Oscar-nominated performance in The Crying Game, Davidson possessed absolutely no desire to build a traditional acting career. When the producers of Stargate desperately approached him for the role of the alien god king, Davidson, hoping to scare them away, demanded an absurd, completely unrealistic salary of $1 million for just a few weeks of work. To his absolute astonishment and internal dismay, the independent financiers, desperate for prestige casting to validate their investment, immediately accepted his astronomical financial terms, forcing him to fly out to the grueling Arizona desert set. On the set, Davidson's profound discomfort with the traditional Hollywood machine was palpable, as he struggled intensely with the elaborate, heavy silk costumes, the towering golden headdresses, and the complex dialogue delivery. The final film radically reshaped Davidson's performance during the post-production phase, utilizing heavy electronic voice modulation and subliminal digital flashes of an alien parasite to mask his vocal hesitations and intensify his terrifying screen presence. Following the film's completion, Davidson actively turned his back on the industry, stepping away from the hollow allure of Hollywood fame to return to a quiet, private life in the fashion world. Years later, the release of the director's cut would restore a crucial, haunting prologue scene depicting a young prehistoric human boy being abducted by a glowing spaceship to become Ra's physical host body. This single narrative restoration completely reframed the villain, shifting him from a campy, tyrannical space dictator into a truly terrifying, ancient parasitic entity that was desperately clinging to its own stolen immortality. Beyond the intense heat and casting eccentricities, the production also found itself blindsided by a serious legal challenge that threatened to cast a long, dark shadow over the film's impending theatrical debut. An obscure schoolteacher from Oklahoma named Omar Zudi suddenly filed a major lawsuit against the production, confidently claiming that the entire premise of the movie was a direct plagiarism of an unproduced script he had written years earlier titled Egyptscape. Zudi maintained that his copyrighted material had been circulated through various industry channels, and that the core concepts of an alien gateway in Egypt had been systematically stolen by the filmmakers. The legal battle was eventually settled out of court under highly confidential terms, ensuring that the specific details of the agreement and any financial compensation were permanently obscured from the public record. While this legal shadow lingered briefly in industry trade papers, it ultimately failed to derail the massive promotional momentum building behind the movie's highly anticipated autumn release. Even the smallest, seemingly insignificant continuity choices on set required intense management, such as the sudden decision to subtly alter and brighten Kurt Russell's hair color mid-production to maintain visual consistency under different lighting setups. This minor cosmetic adjustment was actually vital because the intense, unrelenting desert sun washed out colors far differently than the moody, industrial interior lights of the military bunker sets, directly affecting how the characters' hardened emotional state read on screen. Absolutely nothing about the creation of this film was smooth, predictable, or comfortable, yet when it finally opened in theaters across North America in late October 1994, it defied all industry expectations. The movie debuted forcefully at the #1 spot at the box office, shocking cynical industry analysts who had long written off the late autumn season as a dead zone for massive science fiction blockbusters. The film went on to gross nearly $200 million worldwide against its precarious $55 million budget, instantly validating the immense financial risks taken by its independent European backers and proving that global audiences were deeply hungry for original, mythic sci-fi. This box office miracle completely transformed a troubled, independent production into a valuable commercial property, turning a mispainted prop and a fractured script into the foundation of a multi-decade entertainment phenomenon. Part 2. The spectacular box office triumph of Roland Emmerich's original vision marked the end of a grueling production battle, but it simultaneously ignited a massive corporate scramble as Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer realized they were holding the keys to an unexpected goldmine. The transition from a self-contained, high-concept cinematic feature into a sprawling, multi-layered television franchise required a radical re-engineering of the story's fundamental physics, mythology, and character dynamics. In the original 1994 theatrical cut, the internal mechanics of the cosmic gateway were relatively simple, operating on a fixed, linear trajectory that connected Earth directly to a single, distant point in the universe known as Abydos. When television producers Brad Wright and Jonathan Glassner were tasked with expanding this singular cinematic premise into a weekly episodic series, they quickly realized that the movie's established continuity was far too restrictive to sustain years of television storytelling. The television series, titled Stargate SG-1, would have to completely reinvent the underlying mathematics of the gate itself, expanding the original 39 symbols into a complex, galactic coordinate system that allowed for thousands of potential alien destinations. This creative expansion required a subtle but highly significant retcon of the original film's core lore, transforming the isolated alien portal from a unique historical relic into a vast, forgotten transit network left behind by an ancient race. In the movie, the military required an incredibly complex, room-sized supercomputer network to manually rotate the heavy inner ring of the gate, an agonizingly slow process born from the total absence of the alien dialing technology seen in later iterations. The television series quickly standardized this system by introducing the concept of the dial-home device, an ubiquitous, pedestal-like alien console found on almost every planet that allowed for instant, effortless dialing of the gateway. This mechanical adjustment was an absolute necessity for television production, as it eliminated the need for lengthy, repetitive scenes of computer calibration and allowed the main characters to rapidly escape hostile alien worlds within the tight confines of a 44-minute episode runtime. Hardcore science fiction purists still passionately debate these distinct mechanical differences between the film and the television iterations, tracking how a desperate practical prop choice in 1994 evolved into a rigid, highly codified set of fictional rules. The physical sets constructed inside the historic Spruce Goose Dome in Long Beach for the original movie were monumental in scale, providing a vast, cavernous environment that gave the fictional military facility an undeniable sense of heavy, industrial authenticity. The immense space allowed the production designers to build multi-level steel catwalks, complex military scaffolding, and a towering functional tracking room that looked down upon the massive silver ring resting in its concrete launch cradle. However, this historic wooden dome, originally built to house Howard Hughes' legendary giant flying boat, presented a nightmare for the film's sound recording department due to its bizarre, uncontrollable internal acoustics. The vast, uninsulated wooden walls created massive, echoing sound reflections that routinely distorted the actors' dialogue, forcing the audio team to spend months meticulously cleaning up the vocal tracks or re-recording lines in post-production. When the television series entered production in Vancouver, the crew could not afford to maintain or replicate these massive, acoustically troubled cinematic sets, forcing them to construct a more compact, sound-isolated version of the iconic Cheyenne Mountain embarkation room. This geographic and structural shift altered the visual texture of the franchise, transitioning it from the sweeping, cinematic grandeur of Emmerich's wide anamorphic shots to the tighter, more character-focused, fluid camera movements required for 1990s television. The theatrical version of the film had deliberately moved at a breakneck, relentless pace, with the studio executives constantly demanding that the editors aggressively trim down Daniel Jackson's lengthy, academic lectures on historical linguistics and alternative anthropology. The executives were profoundly terrified that mainstream audiences would lose interest during these dense, intellectual scenes, and they constantly pressured Emmerich to prioritize explosive military action, heavy visual spectacle, and fast-paced narrative momentum over deep mythological world-building. Years later, the release of the official director's cut would finally vindicate the filmmaker's original creative instincts, restoring several minutes of quiet, fascinating anthropological exploration that allowed the alien culture of Abydos to feel like a real, breathing society. This extended cut proved that the true strength of the film lay not in its massive pyrotechnic budgets or its alien firefights, but in the fragile, wide-eyed curiosity of its academic lead character. Despite the intense, ongoing studio pressure to deliver a brainless summer-style blockbuster in the middle of October, Emmerich and Devlin fought fiercely to protect the profound emotional core of their two distinct protagonists. They adamantly refused to compromise on Colonel O'Neill's dark, suffocating cloak of parental grief, maintaining the tragic backstory of his son's accidental death as the essential psychological engine driving his entire character arc. This narrative commitment prevented the movie from devolving into a hollow, jingoistic military fantasy, ensuring that every tactical decision made by the soldiers on the alien planet was filtered through a lens of human trauma and emotional recovery. Similarly, James Spader's delicate portrayal of Daniel Jackson remained beautifully unheroic, maintaining a sense of physical clumsiness and academic vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the hardened, hypermasculine military units surrounding him. It was precisely this unique, highly volatile combination of deep emotional trauma and intellectual curiosity that resonated so powerfully with audiences worldwide, elevating the film far beyond its generic sci-fi peers. As the property successfully transitioned into the legendary television series, the creators faced the daunting challenge of replacing two incredibly distinct, highly charismatic Hollywood stars with a brand new cast that could sustain a multi-year episodic commitment. Richard Dean Anderson, beloved globally for his iconic, light-hearted portrayal of the clever, pacifist hero MacGyver, was cast to step directly into the heavy combat boots previously occupied by Kurt Russell's intensely brooding colonel. Anderson flatly refused to simply mimic Russell's dark, suicidal intensity, instead demanding the creative freedom to infuse the character of Jack O'Neill, now spelled with two L's, with a sharp, dry sense of humor, a healthy disrespect for military authority, and an endearing, everyday regular guy persona. This brilliant tonal shift was instrumental to the long-term survival of the television franchise, as it successfully transformed the character from a tragic, short-lived cinematic figure into a deeply beloved, highly comforting weekly television companion. Michael Shanks was brought in to embody Daniel Jackson, delivering an incredibly faithful, beautifully nuanced performance that honored James Spader's original hesitant cadence while gradually evolving the character into a formidable galactic diplomat. The television series exploded into an unprecedented 10-season phenomenon, spawning multiple highly successful spin-off series like Stargate Atlantis and Stargate Universe, alongside several direct-to-DVD feature films that continuously expanded the boundaries of the universe. What had originally been conceived by Emmerich and Devlin as a self-contained, high-risk cinematic gamble had systematically transformed into a permanent, highly structured corporate infrastructure for MGM. The terrifying, unpredictable miracle of the original independent film had become an organized, highly efficient weekly routine, and the mysterious, volatile cosmic doorway had effectively been normalized into a piece of everyday military transit infrastructure. Yet, for the dedicated fans who continuously analyze the deep roots of the franchise, the true magic of the property remains forever tethered to that initial, chaotic 1994 production where everything nearly fell apart. The entire multi-billion-dollar entertainment empire owes its ultimate existence to a series of frantic, unpolished compromises, a mispainted plaster prop, a volatile script that nearly drove its eccentric leads to walk off the set, and a bizarre water tank experiment conducted in a dusty garage. To fully appreciate the sheer absurdity of the film's survival, one must look closely at the extreme structural chaos that plagued the writing process from its very inception. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin were operating completely outside the traditional Hollywood system, which meant they lacked the standard army of studio script doctors, development executives, and creative focus groups to help refine the narrative flow. They were essentially flying blind, driven entirely by a shared passionate obsession with Erich von Däniken's highly controversial pseudoscientific theories regarding ancient astronauts and extraterrestrial architectural influence on early human civilizations. This profound thematic obsession gave the screenplay a unique, highly idiosyncratic energy that felt completely alien to the cynical, formulaic studio blockbusters dominating the early 90s landscape. However, this unbridled creative freedom also meant that the initial shooting drafts were incredibly rough around the edges, featuring jarring tonal shifts where scenes of intense, weeping parental grief sat uncomfortably next to campy, comic book-style alien laser battles. When James Spader first received this wild, unpolished screenplay, his sophisticated artistic sensibilities were instantly thrown into a state of intense confusion and professional anxiety. He recognized that the project was a dangerous double-edged sword that could either establish him as a versatile, commercially viable leading man or completely destroy his hard-earned credibility within the serious independent film community. Spader's notorious decision to lock himself inside his production trailer over dialogue disputes was not merely the petulant tantrum of a spoiled Hollywood actor, but a desperate, calculated act of artistic self-preservation. He understood with absolute clarity that if his character delivered the clunky exposition-heavy dialogue with even a hint of insincerity, the audience would instantly reject the film's absurd premise and laugh the entire production out of the theater. By forcing Devlin and Emmerich to sit down and meticulously rewrite the script pages on the fly, Spader effectively injected a necessary layer of self-aware, deeply human skepticism into the very fabric of the movie's mythology. Kurt Russell's intense, behind-the-scenes confrontation with Spader remains one of the most revealing and legendary moments in modern film lore, exposing the deep, philosophical divide between two radically different generations of cinematic acting styles. Russell, who had been working continuously in front of cameras since his childhood days as a contract actor for Walt Disney Studios, viewed the profession through a deeply practical, blue-collar lens of hard work and commercial execution. He possessed absolutely no patience for the precious, hyper-analytical method-acting approach of his younger co-star, viewing the script not as a sacred artistic text that needed to be flawless, but as a rough blueprint that required professional showmanship to bring to life. His blunt, iconic reminder to Spader that they were being paid millions of dollars precisely to elevate flawed material cut clean through the high-minded artistic tension, grounding the entire cast in a shared, pragmatic mission to simply get the job done. This intense clashing of creative egos did not break the production, but instead created a fascinating, high-frequency on-screen chemistry between the two leads that perfectly mirrored their characters' profound ideological differences. While the actors were fiercely debating the nuances of their dialogue on the dusty Arizona locations, the practical production crew was engaging in a daily, exhausting war against the physical elements of the desert. The choice to film the vast exterior world of Abydos on location in the shifting dunes of Yuma, rather than on a safe, controlled Hollywood soundstage, gave the movie an undeniable sense of environmental reality that no digital green screen could ever replicate. However, the physical toll of this decision was staggering, as the fine crystalline desert sand systematically infiltrated every single piece of complex mechanical equipment on set, scratching expensive camera lenses and grinding production gears to agonizing halt. The relentless blistering heat warped the delicate film stock inside the camera magazines, forcing the camera assistants to store the unexposed film in portable ice chests normally reserved for catering beverages. The background actors portraying the oppressed human slaves of Abydos had to endure hours of standing barefoot on the scorching sand, requiring the prop department to quickly construct hidden, insulated flesh-colored sandals to protect their feet from severe degree burns. The chaotic logistical nightmare extended to the animal kingdom, where the ill-fated Mastadge horse costume became a source of intense frustration and dark comedy for the exhausted crew. The visual effects department had spent weeks constructing the massive, elaborate creature suit, featuring thick layers of heavy synthetic fur, sweeping curved horns, and a bulky internal frame designed to completely alter the horse's natural silhouette. When the highly trained Hollywood stunt horse was finally strapped into the finished apparatus, the poor animal experienced an immediate panic attack, completely overwhelmed by the crushing weight and the total loss of its peripheral vision. The horse flatly refused to take a single step forward, instead choosing to nervously buck and kick, endangering the surrounding crew and threatening to permanently delay the crucial sequence where the alien beast drags Daniel Jackson across the desert dunes. The sudden, desperate pivot to using a small, disguised dog pulling a miniature sled in forced perspective wide shots was a masterclass in low-budget, guerrilla-style filmmaking ingenuity that saved the production thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, the creative saga surrounding the casting of Jay Davidson as the alien god Ra added an entirely separate layer of avant-garde weirdness to this commercial Hollywood enterprise. Davidson was a profound anomaly in the industry, a fiercely independent, highly eccentric individual who had zero formal training as an actor and felt an intense, open contempt for the hollow nature of celebrity culture. His stunning, ethereal performance in The Crying Game had made him an overnight darling of the International Film Festival circuit, leading to an unexpected Academy Award nomination that thrust him directly into the commercial spotlight against his will. When the producers of Stargate offered him the role of Ra, Davidson was actively trying to find a way to escape the industry entirely, which is why he demanded an unprecedented, completely extortionate $1 million paycheck for what amounted to less than 3 weeks of actual screen time. He was completely convinced that the independent financiers would balk at the absurd price tag and leave him alone, allowing him to return to his quiet life working as a humble fashion assistant in London. When the desperate producers surprisingly agreed to his demands, Davidson found himself trapped by his own financial leverage, forced to fly out to a grueling, high-pressure American film set that felt completely antithetical to his artistic sensibilities. On the set, his profound lack of professional acting experience created immense logistical friction, as he frequently struggled to project his voice over the loud wind machines or memorize the complex, invented alien dialogue under the intense heat. His deep-seated frustration was frequently compounded by the sheer physical weight of the elaborate, museum-quality costumes designed by Sanya Milkovic-Hayes, which featured heavy layers of authentic woven silks, intricate beadwork, and massive Egyptian collars made of solid metal. Davidson's palpable, authentic discomfort and icy, detached on-set demeanor were ultimately weaponized by Emmerich, who realized that the actor's natural, cold alienation translated beautifully on screen into a chillingly detached, godlike arrogance. In post-production, the sound designers heavily processed Davidson's vocal tracks, lowering the pitch and adding an eerie, multi-layered electronic resonant echo that transformed his hesitant line deliveries into the terrifying, booming commands of an ancient cosmic entity. The complex legal battle with Oklahoma schoolteacher Omar Zudi added another layer of real-world anxiety to the project's final months, serving as a stark reminder of the legal perils that constantly haunt high-concept Hollywood screenplays. Zudi was utterly convinced that the film's unique core premise, the discovery of an ancient Egyptian artifact that serves as a physical wormhole portal to another world ruled by historical deities, had been systematically lifted from his own unproduced manuscript. The teacher had spent years meticulously researching ancient Egyptian mythology and linguistics to craft his own epic screenplay, which he had aggressively submitted to various Hollywood production companies and talent agencies in the early 90s. While Emmerich and Devlin adamantly maintained that they had developed their concept completely independently based on their own personal reading of alternative history books, the striking narrative similarities between the two scripts created a dangerous legal liability. The sudden, quiet out-of-court financial settlement prevented a lengthy, highly publicized legal battle that could have easily frozen the film's international distribution rights and tanked the studio's massive marketing investment. Part 3. The incredible financial success of Stargate ensured its permanent place in pop culture history, but the true legacy of the film lies in how its chaotic, high-pressure production decisions fundamentally shaped the aesthetic DNA of modern television science fiction. When the final theatrical print was locked and distributed to theaters in October 1994, the filmmakers had no idea that their desperate creative gambles would become a multi-decade blueprint for an entire entertainment industry. The decision to completely repaint the 22-foot physical gateway structure from a flat, light-devouring matte black to a vibrant, highly reflective metallic silver remains the ultimate symbol of the production's triumphant ingenuity. This single, frantic choice born out of raw panic completely changed how mainstream audiences visualized alien technology, shifting the genre away from the smooth, clean, plastic-dominated designs of Star Trek and toward a heavy, industrial, materially honest aesthetic. The physical reality of that silver ring, the way its deeply carved ancient glyphs organically caught the flickering light of real fire torches, gave the film a tangible, grounded authority that modern, hyper-polished digital visual effects still struggle to replicate. The profound creative friction between the two lead actors, James Spader and Kurt Russell, also established an incredibly rich, highly effective narrative dynamic that would be systematically copied by almost every science fiction television series that followed in its wake. The brilliant structural pairing of a deeply traumatized, hyper-pragmatic military commander alongside a brilliant, intensely curious, non-violent academic scientist created a perfect engine for ongoing ideological conflict and philosophical exploration. This specific character dynamic became the absolute cornerstone of Stargate SG-1, where the constant, witty ideological sparring between Richard Dean Anderson's Jack O'Neill and Michael Shanks' Daniel Jackson provided the essential emotional heart of the series. The movie had effectively proven that science fiction worked best not when it focused exclusively on advanced spaceships and alien laser battles, but when it anchored its grand cosmic concepts in the deeply relatable, highly contrasting human perspectives of its central protagonists. The intense, real-world arguments that occurred inside those dusty production trailers in 1994 had inadvertently refined a raw screenplay into a timeless, highly versatile narrative formula. The legendary garage experiments conducted by Jeffrey Okun and David Stump to create the Gateway's fluid-liquid portal also marked a historic turning point in the complex evolution of Hollywood visual effects. By stubbornly rejecting the smooth, sterile, purely digital animations of the early 90s, and instead insisting on a violent, chaotic, practical fluid dynamic, they created a visual effect that felt genuinely dangerous and alive. The iconic, explosive outward surge of the portal, the terrifying kawoosh effect that drenched the garage crew with iced tea-colored water, became one of the most recognizable and beloved visual signatures in the history of the science fiction genre. The sheer technical difficulty of rendering that single sequence, using the primitive computer processing power of 1994, forced the visual effects team to innovate at a breakneck pace, pushing early digital compositing systems like Domino to their absolute physical limits. The resulting imagery possessed a beautiful, organic, slightly unpredictable imperfection that gave the cosmic wormhole an undeniable sense of physical weight and terrifying natural power. The grueling, sleep-deprived post-production marathon where 66 complex visual effects shots were completely assembled in the absolute final week before delivery remains a legendary testament to the sheer resilience of the crew. Working under brutal, career-threatening studio deadlines, these forgotten digital artists and film editors pulled off an absolute technical miracle, seamlessly integrating complex shots of the massive alien pyramid ship and sweeping desert explosions into the final cut. This intense pressure cooker environment forced a level of rapid, instinctual decision-making that stripped away all unnecessary artistic pretension, resulting in a lean, fast-paced cinematic experience that gripped audiences from the very first frame. The groundbreaking morphing sequences of the alien guard helmets, which took 9 agonizing months of custom software development to perfect, set a brand new industry standard for digital transformation effects. The slight, unsettling geometrical imperfections of those early digital morphs actually enhanced the movie's eerie atmosphere, making the ancient alien technology feel deeply unnatural and fundamentally terrifying to the human eye. The intense, unforgiving desert shoot around Yuma, Arizona, where cameras constantly melted and crew members desperately swept away footprints in the scorching sand, left an indelible mark on the film's visual texture. The sweeping, sun-bleached vistas of Abydos felt like a real hostile, infinitely vast world precisely because the cast and crew were genuinely suffering through the brutal reality of a 120-degree desert environment. The palpable physical exhaustion of the performers, the natural glare of the unyielding desert sun, and the fine dust that permanently coated every surface gave the film an authentic, documentary-style grittiness that elevated it far above typical studio-bound productions. Even the bizarre, low-tech logistical compromises, like using a clever force-perspective dog to substitute for a panicked stunt horse, demonstrated a brilliant survivalist filmmaking mentality where failure was simply never an option. This raw, unpolished environmental reality provided the essential visual contrast needed to make the film's highly advanced alien technologies and massive pyramid spaceships feel shockingly real and grounded when they finally appeared on screen. Jay Davidson's brief, highly lucrative, and intensely volatile contribution to the project, as the alien god Ra, remains one of the most fascinating and eccentric casting anomalies in the history of commercial cinema. His absolute open contempt for Hollywood fame, his extreme physical discomfort on the hot desert sets, and his natural, icy detachment were masterfully channeled by the filmmakers into a legendary villainous performance. Davidson's Ra was completely unlike any science fiction antagonist that had come before him. An ethereal, deeply fragile, yet utterly terrifying and ruthless parasitic entity whose immense power was masked by an aura of delicate, ancient royal beauty. The post-production vocal modifications and the subsequent narrative expansions in the director's cut successfully elevated the character into a tragic, multi-layered cosmic tyrant who would serve as the ultimate ideological gold standard for all future villains within the franchise. Davidson's sudden, permanent departure from the entertainment industry immediately following the film's release only enhanced the mysterious, mythic aura surrounding his performance, ensuring that his unique portrayal of Ra would never be diluted by cheap, repetitive sequels. The quiet, out-of-court resolution of the plagiarism lawsuit filed by Oklahoma schoolteacher Omar Zudi served as a final dramatic reminder of the immense financial and legal tightropes that independent films must walk to survive. The legal shadow could have easily crushed a less resilient production, but the overwhelming commercial momentum and raw narrative power of Stargate allowed it to safely weather the storm and achieve global box office dominance. The film's surprising ability to conquer the historically dead box office month of October 1994 completely rewrote the traditional Hollywood distribution rulebook, proving to cynical executives that a high-concept, independently financed original science fiction epic could successfully compete against the major studio franchises. The massive, cavernous sets built inside the acoustically troubled Spruce Goose Dome had successfully housed a miracle, transforming a collection of highly volatile creative personalities and unproven concepts into a global cinematic phenomenon that refused to die. When we look back at the incredible multi-decade journey of the Stargate franchise, from its humble, chaotic origins as a troubled feature film to its permanent status as a foundational pillar of television science fiction, the sheer improbability of its survival remains the most shocking element of the entire story. Every single critical component of the production threatened to collapse into absolute disaster at some point during its creation. A prop ring that initially looked like a worthless matte black tire, a script that caused an intense standoff between its highly skeptical lead actors, a visual effects department that accidentally flooded its own equipment with iced tea powder, and a brutal desert environment that actively tried to melt the physical cameras. Yet through a combination of raw desperation, brilliant low-tech ingenuity, and fierce professional pride, the cast and crew systematically transformed these near-fatal disasters into a series of stunning creative triumphs. The silver repaint worked, the script standoffs forced essential character clarity, the garage water tank experiments delivered timeless visual iconography, and a movie that almost came apart at the seams successfully birthed an immortal cosmic empire.